By 1966, the Beatles had achieved an incredible amount of success. The group was selling records by the millions. The world were going crazy for the Beatles. The band soon became the target of some bizarre accusations surrounding serious topics, including religion. On August 28, 1966, the Beatles gave their last taped press conference in the United States.
Well, would you clarify the remarks that were attributed to you?
You tell me what you think I meant, and I'll tell you whether I agree or...
During the 15-minute session, the band received some weird questions.
Have you ever trained or used Beatle doubles as decoys?
No. We tried to get Brian Epstein to do it. He wouldn't do it.
Mr. Lennon, is it true you're planning to give up music for a career in the field of comparative religion?
No. Is that another of the jokes going on?
Have you ever trained or used Beatles doubles? Mr. Lennon, is it true that you are going to give up music for a career in the field of comparative religion? In an August 19, 1966, interview, an important question was asked to the Beatles.
But do you mind being asked questions, for example, in America, people keep asking questions about Vietnam. Does this seem useful?
Well, I don't know. If you can say that war's no good and a few people believe you, then it may be good. I don't know. You can't say too much, though. That's the trouble.
It seems a bit silly to be in America and for none of them to mention Vietnam as if nothing was happening.
But why should they ask you about it if you're successful?
Yeah, that's right. That is why they do.
Because Americans always ask showbiz people what they think about it. So do the British,
In the 21st century, celebrity opinions hold influence on the media. The persona of a successful musician or actor is extremely powerful. Just imagine if you were able to capture that celebrity and use it for your own agenda. Let's examine some of the most notorious claims. During 1969, the song Revolution 9 was played backward on numerous American radio stations. In the tune, the words "Turn Me On, Dead Man" can be recognized. In the Beatles' single "I'm So Tired," a sequence of gibberish can be heard. When played in reverse, the phrase "Paul is dead man. Miss him" can be made out. In Strawberry Fields Forever, some believe John can be heard saying "I buried Paul" in a slow deep voice over the final refrain. People have pointed to the continued reference of the walrus in the Beatles' music. In the song Glass Onion, John Lennon can be heard saying Paul was the walrus. This has been described as a reference to Paul's disfigured corpse. To add fuel to the fire, the Beatles rarely commented on the Paul is dead rumor. After August of 1966, the band stopped making live performances. During this time in history, the group's music changed. The Beatles wrote lyrics about death and suicide, and used dark imagery in their songs. The band's singles were far from the fun-loving collaborations that populated the radio during the early 1960s. By the end of the decade, the long-time friendship between Paul McCartney and John Lennon deteriorated. The band separated in 1970, and Paul sued John, George and Ringo for breaking their contract with Apple Corporation. The Beatles underwent an extensive change in their appearance from 1967 to 1970. Sgt Peppers is the Beatles' 8th studio album, released on June 1, 1967. The cover image that was captured for the record has raised controversy. It was a difficult picture to take and it cost the band thousands of dollars. For the picture, 57 life-sized cardboard photographs of celebrities were constructed. The band also used 9 waxwork models, a stone bust, a portable TV, 4 statuettes and a doll wearing a jumper with the words "Welcome the Rolling Stones." The Sgt Peppers cover appears to show a funeral service. All of the celebrities used in the picture have a common death experience. In 1967, when the photo was taken, most of the people had either died young or experienced a near-death accident. Many theories have been put forward to explain the inclusion of these specific people. In the case of Bob Dylan's image, he experienced a bad 1966 motorcycle crash. The Sgt Pepper's album cover includes the image of Stuart Sutcliffe, who was the Beatles' original bass player, who died in 1962. Some other noted appearances include occultist A-lister Crowley, Mae West, Jewish comedian Lenny Bruce, architect Simon Rodier, Robert Peel, Dylan Thomas, Dion, Marilyn Monroe, comedian Max Miller, Marlon Brando and many more. To the immediate left of the band is a younger cardboard copy of John, Paul, Ringo, and George. The men appear to be sad and mourning. Like all Beatles album covers, it has been suggested that a large number of clues are visible that imply Paul McCartney's death. The wreath of yellow flowers included on the cover appears to be in the shape of a left-handed bass guitar. A small white toy car is visible on the lap of the Shirley Temple doll. This is a bizarre feature that has been attributed to a possible car wreck. Shirley Temple is the only person, besides the Beatles, to appear in the image twice. The cover shows Paul McCartney wearing a hat with the letters OPP, which stands for Ontario Provincial Police. This falls in line with the reports that Paul McCartney was replaced with a man named William Shepard, coming from the Canadian Police Department. The Sgt Peppers album cover remains a great piece of photographic history. A large collection of stories exist on the internet regarding the death of Paul McCartney. The most prominent is the 60th documents. In late 1999, a man named Michael Abram broke into George Harrison's Friar Park home and stabbed him 7 times. Harrison was nearly killed in the attack. As the story goes, George was targeted for murder because he collected evidence on the death of Paul McCartney and mailed it to some of his Far Eastern friends. In 2002, after George Harrison died from cancer, the 60th document appeared online. The report is a reference to the 28th license plate pictured on the Abbey Road cover. It indicates that if Paul McCartney was alive, he would be 60 years old in 2002. The tale begins with a prominent Jewish man named Brian Epstein. Epstein helped launch the Beatles' career and he was their longtime manager. In 1967, Epstein's duties in the group deteriorated, and he was pushed away from the band. He died on August 27, 1967, of a drug overdose. As the story goes, on September 11, 1966, Brian Epstein and Paul McCartney were traveling in a car when they were accosted by a group of men in black suits. Brian and Paul were kidnapped. 5 days later, John, George and Ringo received a call to go identify the dead body of Paul McCartney. Paul was found at the foot of a hill, a short distance from a white Volkswagen. He was in a ghastly state. Paul had been dead for a long time. The left side of his face was torn to pieces. His right ear had been bitten away by animals. Paul's body was half burned and his teeth were hanging from his lips. The 60th report says that at the scene, John and George heard a man near the body say, "Look, it seems like a walrus." Brian Epstein's dead body was discovered 2 days later. His car was pushed over a cliff and set on fire. Written on the side of the car was the word Jude, which is German for Jew. The 60th report says that John, George and Ringo were determined to continue their music, so they allowed a secret group of cosmetic surgeons to replace Paul. However, in exchange for the help, the band was told to keep quiet. The penalty for refusing silence was death. The document says that a third Paul McCartney was used in the recording studio until a double was found. The candidate for Paul was William Shepard from the Canadian Military Police. The report identifies a number of differences between Paul McCartney and William Shepard. Paul was long-sighted, Bill is short-sighted. Paul's hair naturally went from the left to right, while Bill's from right to left. Paul had a round face and Bill has a longer face. Paul was left-handed and Bill is right-handed. After Paul's death, the band began to refer to themselves as Beatles, instead of the Beatles. Bill had an older appearance, so they grew beards and mustaches. The paper continues to suggest that the KKK was responsible for the murders, and that Brian Epstein was the primary target. It says that Yoko Ono was a spy for the CIA, and that she was responsible for John Lennon's death. The document claims that Paul McCartney died because he was unable to get medication for a disease he suffered from. Instead of a kidnapping, Paul is said to have died by way of a car accident. McCartney and Lennon have an argument in the recording studio, and Paul leaves in the middle of the night. He drives away in his white convertible and picks up a young hitchhiker named Rita. Rita becomes delirious with excitement and causes Paul to crash his car into a large truck. The description is similar to the death of Tara Brown. According to the account, McCartney was decapitated in the crash. John, George and Ringo were called to the scene. At that time, the group was approached by a MI5 agent named Maxwell. Maxwell made the comment about Paul looking like a walrus, and then he convinces the band to use a replacement. Phil Acryl is a man who was a member of an early 1960s group named Denny Laine and the Diplomats. Acryl disappeared from the music scene in 1965, and has become connected with the Paul McCartney conspiracy. He played guitar and backup vocals for Denny Laine and the Diplomats. In 1964, Denny Laine left the band to join the Moody Blues. He sang the Moody Blues' first big hit, Go Now. In 1971, Denny Laine, Paul McCartney and Linda McCartney formed the band Wings. Denny Laine remained part of Wings for the group's entire 10-year run. In this theory, the details surrounding Paul McCartney's death are different. The story starts with Paul going missing in France. It is said that Brian Epstein traveled to France to find Paul. On their return flight, the men experienced a plane crash. Paul's disfigured body was tossed from the plane. It was discovered on a beach near Outre, North France. The conspiracy continues to describe a musician named Phil Acryl, who was hired as Paul's double, in 1965. Acryl was a good lyricist and could play the piano and drums. He had a beautiful voice, but could not imitate Paul. For this reason, the band decided to use a voice imitator to complete Sgt Peppers, The Magical Mystery Tour and some of the White Album. In 1968, Phil Acryl officially became Paul McCartney. Voice apparent identification is a process that involves the combination of both oral, listening, and spectrographic instrumental comparisons of the human voice. The modern-day forensic utilization of the technique started in the late 1960s. Since that time, voice identification has been used in a large number of criminal cases around the world. In 1969, at the height of the Paul is Dead coverage, a man named Henry M. Truby stirred up some international media controversy. Truby was the director of language and linguistics research at the University of Miami. In 1969, he examined several audio recordings of the Beatles to see if the group's sonic fingerprints matched. Henry Truby's findings revealed a spectrograph of what he claimed is 3 separate Pauls. Truby stated that his experiments were conducted with a sound spectrograph machine that indicated that there were 6 different voices on the Beatles' records. 3 people were clearly identified as John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. The other 3 musicians sounded roughly like the same person. However, the spectrograph, which makes a clear fingerprint, showed a different authorship. In the late 1960s, the news prompted Apple Corp to issue a brief statement from Paul: "I am alive and well and unconcerned about the rumors of my death. But if I were dead, I would be the last to know." Research into the issue has been conducted by various independent technicians. Let's examine some claims. The last full song performed by James Paul McCartney was She's Leaving Home on the Sgt Peppers album. However, his voice is evident in many songs after 1966. It is said that James Paul McCartney left behind an unfinished version of Penny Lane, so he is heard only in the main chorus. The first song that was performed strictly by today's Paul McCartney was Hello, Goodbye. Voice analysis has suggested that James Paul McCartney is responsible for the song Her Majesty, which appears at the end of the Beatles' Abbey Road album. Her Majesty is a bizarre tune. It is only 22 seconds long and has been attributed to both Lennon, McCartney. No trusted scientific journal has yet to officially examine or publish voice-separate recordings of Paul McCartney. In 1970, the Beatles released a song titled Dig It. The song is one of the few Beatles tunes to be credited to all the band members. Several versions of Dig It were recorded during the Get Back, Let It Be jam sessions of late January 1969. A 51-second version of the single was chosen for the Let It Be album. The song includes a bizarre sequence of celebrity references that have been the target of controversy. In the released version, Lennon sings like a Rolling Stone. Like a Rolling Stone. Like the FBI and the CIA, and the BBC, B.B. King and Doris Day, Matt Busby. At the end of the song Lennon can be heard saying that was Can You Dig It by Georgie Wood, and now we'd like to do Hark the Angels Come. The second sentence was cut out from the Let It Be film recording. Gabriella Calzai is an Italian forensic pathologist who specializes in the identification of people through craniometry, which is the comparison of skull features. Calzai is a forensic odontologist and an expert in the study of teeth. Francesco Gavazzini is a specialist in computer analyses. In the past 15 years, the pair have worked on a number of high-profile identification cases. In 2008, Calzai and Gavazzini became interested in the Paul McCartney conspiracy theory. Originally, they were attempting to dismiss the claims. However, they soon discovered some bizarre facts. After images of Paul were analyzed from before and after 1966, the professionals were shocked to discover that the faces did not match. The findings were published in the July 15, 2009, issue of Wired Italia, the Italian edition of the US magazine Wired. When comparing photos of the human face, the pictures must be resized and scaled. In this case, the researchers chose the distance between the pupils for a scaling factor. After the pictures are scaled, they can be placed over each other and examined. The article suggests that the older photos of Paul do not match. It provides scientific evidence to support the accusations. The frontal curvature of the jaw in each Paul is different. The later Paul has a head that is more oblong and not as rounded. The article suggests that plastic surgery is highly visible in the older McCartney. Calzai points out that the line separating Paul's lips is much wider. The identifiable point where the nose detaches from the face is different and the pictures show some bizarre characteristics in the ears. The paper states that the teeth of each individual are different, and that there is evidence of alterations to the older Paul. During the research, Calzai became amazed with the difference in the shape of the palate. The mandibular curve between the two sets of photos showed a discrepancy of over 6%, well beyond the threshold of error. Before 1966, each side of Paul's jaw is composed of two curves. Since 1967, it appears to be a single curve. The researchers suggest that if Paul McCartney wants to put an end to the rumors, he can offer a DNA test. They discuss a case from the early 1970s in which McCartney had to give a DNA sample. The test was requested by a German woman named Bettina Crispin. Bettina Crispin claims that her 1962 birth certificate shows that Paul McCartney is her father. The DNA test that Paul was forced to submit indicates that he is not the father. Since the occurrence, Bettina has accused McCartney of sending a substitute for the test. She claims that the signature given by the donor is that of a right-handed individual. In 2006, the German authorities opened a case into the claim. If Paul is proven to be the father of Bettina Crispin, she could receive 10% of his estate upon death. By coincidence, on the same day that the article was released in Italy, July 15, 2009, Paul McCartney appeared on the David Letterman Show in New York City. McCartney gave an outdoor performance on top of the Ed Sullivan Theatre. During the interview, Paul laughed with Letterman about the silly rumor that he had died in 1966.